Hello, my name is Hannah Glazer, and this will be my presentation for my portfolio project. A little bit about me: I am a queer disabled artist from Orlando, Florida. Initially, when I came to UNF, it was for engineering, but that just wasn't for me, so I ended up transferring to the printing, drawing, printmaking major, and specifically focused in printmaking, and now specialize in relief. I take inspiration from artists that focus a lot in the horror elements, as well as graphic narratives, and particularly Peter Doig, Emil Ferris, and Alison Bechtel, who all three can be seen heavily their influence in my work. I also take inspiration from horror filmography, particularly of the 70s and 80s. There's just something about the composition and lighting in those films that really intrigues me. And as well can be seen in Guillermo del Toro's work, particularly The Shape of Water, which is a film that inspires me greatly. And then I also have been influenced more recently by Omega Mart, or by Meow Wolf, and how it does a critique on the capitalist system while still having humor in it, which is something I try to bring to my work when I'm dealing with issues, as I try to focus in political issues in my own work. Themes. The intersection of gender and sexuality and disability, specifically through my own lens, is something that I focus on in my work, and then try to translate through media representations and trope, particularly of horror media. And because of this, it ties into class disparity through the art hierarchy, and particularly how kitsch and craft and camp are frequently disregarded in the art world, usually on the basis of classism and gender discrimination. So, a little bit about my process. Many of my pieces start out as these wild collages in my sketchbooks that will be refined as I go into a clear composition. And then for relief, I will take it into a Photoshop situation to collage it into a more satisfactory place, and then transfer it over to immediately start carving. And I will leave spaces empty as I am initially starting in the design process, as I want the piece to be informed as I work. And I will end up with something, as you can see here, that will be printed into quite a collaged combo, which I'm rather satisfied with and feel like it's a proper representation of me as an artist. So, the first series I wanted to discuss as a whole is the Running Girl series, which was a response to on-campus harassment I'd experienced in my freshman year of college. And the Running Girl series was done from the perspective of an on-campus space, particularly a bridge I used to walk on every night. To come back, where two students of my grade level would follow me every evening after my night classes. After time separated from this event, I started processing it in consideration to the tying to horror elements, and particularly how viewership is in this, their viewership as the people harassing me versus the viewership of an antagonist in the film versus the viewership of those watching it. So in my design of the piece, I specifically turned the feminine figure to represent me away from the audience, so there's this sense of disconnect and concern as she's looking for those watching her, as we do so without informed consent. I also specifically composed this on the bridge of the campus to tie it more directly to my own personal experience. I also wanted to incorporate this in the Case series, which, while not being too significant to my experience, was also my second relief printing series and felt relevant to my work as a development of a relief printmaker, as that is what I currently specialize in. The next series, which I focused in relief, was the You Are Not Alone series, which I submitted to the 2019 Preserve exhibition and got 2 of my 7 pieces accepted. In the You Are Not Alone series, it was meant to be an implication, and after going throughout the Preserve and considering the spaces where nature reclaimed areas that we had built over, in this instance a bridge I had discovered that had been broken down from the root systems, destroying the supports beneath, as well as the acknowledgement as I found many areas that had been trampled or polluted or left dirty. How there's always this acknowledgement that no matter what you are doing out there, there are species who will have to live with what you have done. and to create that sense of uneasiness as you're held accountable for the actions you have committed. I also wanted to incorporate one of my paintings, as I do more recently lean into painting, though I would say relief is still my main medium, and this is the painting Monotropa uniflora, which is now going to be in this year's Preserve show, and represents the plant itself, which is referred to sometimes as ghost flower or Indian pipe, and how it cannot produce any of its own green chlorophyll, so I refuse to put any green into the actual piece in itself. Finally, I wanted to conclude on a more recent series, which was a continuation of the hysteria themes in my large-scale Blocktober print, which is domestic versus workplace. It's a personal versus public abuse narrative. I did the series in a printing of 3 layers, which I printed it in, and I would sometimes only print 2 and leave the implication of the figure in itself. Now, the print with the Black-Eyed Susans and the hands represented the domestic violence experience, as the hands represent and the sign for or calling for help in a domestic violence situation, and some of the figures incorporated directly the face itself, and in some you can see, like here in the green, the way the skeletal structure is visible as it is a representation of the workplace of violence, and is referencing a historical example of the radium girls who, because of their exposure and disregard in their workplace, they suffered radium poisoning that dissolved the bones particularly in their jaws, and so you can see, despite the skull being there, the jaw does not exist. And as they worked at a factory that produced clocks, I incorporated the numbers around them that also represented their tie to how quickly they had succumbed to the radium poisoning shortly after. Finally, I want to conclude on the display I did of this series, which referenced back to the Running Girl, where I went back to the bridge where I had been stalked for most of my freshman year and tied these pieces together by airing out the quote-unquote dirty laundry, which became the title of the piece. I wanted to tie how domestic and workplace violence can lean into the personal effects of a person and be displayed publicly along with their personal items, so I incorporated my own clothing into the piece as well. Thank you for your time.